You know, like when you have those kinds of traits at that position, if a team thinks that you could be a starter by like year two, those guys are going to go.
Fran, obviously a jam-packed 2 weeks for you, but it is draft season, combine here in the next couple of weeks. But before we get too deep into that, all eyes, of course, this past weekend on offensive tackle Max Aanatur. It felt like every single time that I opened social media, there was a new highlight of him winning a one-on-one rep, a team rep, scouts talking about him. What was your take on Arizona State offensive tackle Max Aanatur at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, I was really excited about him coming in and was a guy that I thought had the potential to be a big riser just from honestly like my study over the summer. You're talking about a guy who's 6'6", north of 320 pounds. You know what kind of physical specimen he is from an athletic standpoint. So when you see a guy that's kind of still a moldable ball of clay, we know the background, late to football, didn't play until junior college, gets thrown into the fire at Arizona State and has gotten better every single year. And when you see that, and you're like, all right, like I'm expecting it to be a little bit up and down over the course of Senior Bowl practice. You're going up against the best of the best, and he's still a little bit green. But what you saw was a guy who got better and more comfortable as the week went on. I thought the day one last Tuesday was probably his worst day, but then he came back and had a really strong Wednesday. And I would say the other big thing too, as a former basketball player, a guy that was late to football. One question that everyone, whether it's basketball, track, baseball, lacrosse, like whatever that other sport was, if you're late to football, a lot of scouts, a lot of coaches will say like, all right, like, is he tough enough? Is he going to be able to handle like, the physicality of playing in the NFL, especially along the offensive line? I will say like that offensive line, defensive line, like that, those sessions over there were extremely intense with the American squad. And Iheanachor was like in the thick of it from the jump, like didn't back down from anybody, was as physical as anyone, and then he backed it up in the game. And you saw a couple of those highlight blocks from Saturday. So yeah, a really good week from Iheanachor. Certainly, I would say one of like the big winners from a like the national NFL draft zeitgeist. Like now everybody's talking about him. I would say Iheanachor very easily one of the winners of the week.
It feels like anytime over the years when it comes to some of these draft prospects, and I could be wrong, where you do have some of these guys that have just A+ size, right? 6'6", like 330 pounds, like you had mentioned with Max. It does feel like maybe there is questions of like, okay, playing time wherever they're coming from, but that's not necessarily the case with Max. Do you feel like his stock paired with the what he did at the Senior Bowl plus all of the reps and games that he played at Arizona State could have him as potentially a day 2 pick?
I think so. And honestly, man, like I've seen worse players go in the first round. Like when you have those kinds of traits at that position, if a team thinks that you could be a starter by like year two, those guys are going to go. And for what I expect in terms of like combine and pro day workouts, like athletic testing, again at that size, yeah, to me like the sky is the limit. And now I don't think he's going to go top 15, top 20. But again, in this class, like I could absolutely see him sneaking into the end of the first round. I find it very hard to believe he's going to get out of the top 50 with these measurables, and again at that position.
That's awesome. So awesome for Max. Obviously, I know a lot of folks going to be excited to see what he does at the NFL Combine, but not the only Arizona State Sun Devil that has been busy over the last couple of weeks. Linebacker Keshan Elliott as well at the Senior Bowl. What'd you see from Keyshaun out there?
Yeah, honestly, like first day was one of the best defensive players out there in terms of just like noticing him rep after rep after rep. Every time he was out on the field or something was going his direction, it just felt like you felt his physicality even from the stands. So just kind of watching, walking away from the stadium, I was like, yeah, like Keshaun Elliott, really good first day of practice. And I thought that carried throughout the rest of his time on the practice field. It's certainly like he's going to have some athletic limitations compared to some of these other guys. You look around at some of the other top, Jacob Rodriguez, probably a little bit more of a fluid mover, Kyle Lewis from Pitt, more explosive. But for a guy that's that big, he's got instincts and he's got toughness and physicality, and that can carry you a long way at that position, especially. So I think when you look at Keshaun Elliott, I don't think that he's got like the draft ceiling in terms of draft slot of Iheanachor, certainly. But if you're talking like into day 3, a guy that could potentially become a starter sooner rather than later, he's up there for me. And that's why I've got a pretty high grade on Elliott, because I do have him as a future starter in the NFL. And so when you look at his toughness, his instincts, to me, that carries a lot of weight at that position.
Do you think that this is maybe, for lack of better terms, a weaker linebacker class going into this draft? And if so, how much do you think that could ultimately help Keyshawn's draft stock as we get closer to April?
I don't necessarily view it as a weak linebacker class, but I do view it as it's a class with a lot of question marks, right? Where, I think that we know that there are a couple guys at the top that are a total package. A couple of these guys at Ohio State, and to me, like there's a little bit of a cutoff there where, all right, like Anthony Hill from Texas, like yeah, like around the ball a lot, but not quite the best athlete. And I don't know if he's got quite the instincts to make up for it. I honestly have he and Elliott have a very similar grade for me, based off my evaluations. But then you get into like Harold Perkins from LSU, great athlete, undersized. What position is he? Is he going to be able to translate to the NFL? I mentioned Kyle Lewis from Pitt, extremely undersized, close to 210 pounds. Is he going to be able to translate playing in an off-ball role, like purely stacked, close to the line of scrimmage? Like I don't know. And then you start going down the list, and it's a bunch of other guys. Like like is this guy more of an edge, or is he going to be an off-ball linebacker? Is this guy going to be like play as a safety over in the slot in space, or is he going to be an off-ball linebacker? We have these conversations every single year, and it's honestly why I feel like linebacker is one of the, I want to say like misevaluated, but it's one of the hardest positions to evaluate. You are in constant conflict every single play, run pass conflict. Everything's got to be fast in terms of how you process things, how you see it. And a lot of people get, goo goo gaga over the guys that are going to run 4-4, but that doesn't always translate to NFL success. And that's why when I look at Keshan Elliott, a guy that's constantly around the football, plays through contact really well, sees things. He's got like high speed internet in terms of how he's processing things and keen diagnosing, run pass. All right, get to my landmark, or, key my block and get downhill. That's the way he plays. And to me, that translates really well to NFL success.
Keyshaun, one of several Arizona State defenders who started for the Sun Devils over their last couple of seasons that are
Yep.
now making their way to the NFL. One on the back end, Myles Rowser. I know he was a fan favorite here in Tempe over the last couple of seasons. He was at the Shrine Bowl a couple weeks back. Somebody that I know folks in Tempe have a lot of expectations and high hopes for when he does potentially get to the NFL. What say you, Fran?
Yeah, I saw him at the Shrine Bowl down in Frisco, Texas, last week. And when I looked at the way that he, what is his skill set going to be? Like he showed some coverage chops against the tight end, obviously in practice in terms of like the physicality and the ability to be around the ball. That's not always going to be able to show up, especially for safeties. Just you're playing, 25 yards off the ball, 20 yards off the ball. If you're not going full contact and full speed, it's tough to always be able to show that. I wasn't particularly moved one way or the other. Watching Rouser live up close was my first exposure to him. Came in a little bit small. I came in under 190 pounds. That's like an eliminating number for some people at that position, and say like, yeah, you can't play safety in the NFL at sub 190. And so to me, like if he's going to be that weight through the rest of the pre-draft process, that means that he's going to need to like blow the doors off the testing, because then it's like, all right, well, he's an elite athlete at that size. There's the sliding scale that can come into play there. But if he doesn't test like an elite athlete at that size, that's going to be the big question. And when you talk about like safety or linebacker rankings kind of being all over the place, and it's honestly, it's the same thing with safety, especially in today's league with all the split safety looks and everything in terms of like the zone heavy defenses. Like safety is as important a position as any in a lot of NFL defenses. He's gonna be put under the microscope. It's a really interesting safety class, but much like linebacker, there's a couple guys at the top that everybody's excited about, and then there's going to be a lot of debate with how the rest of the board kind of unfolds.
Well, look, there might be some debate with some of the Sun Devils going to the league, but I don't think there's any debate about Arizona State wide receiver Jordyn Tyson and what he was able to accomplish this past season, last several seasons in college football. I know the last time that we had talked, we were in agreement of JT's a first-round guy. I'd love to see
Yep.
what he would do the rest of the 2025 season. Ultimately, suffered a lot of injury dealing with that
Yep.
hamstring. Where do you figure his draft stock is right now in the first round? And are we talking top 10? Are we talking back half of the first round? And maybe how do you see that rising and potentially falling over the next several weeks?
Yeah, I think that the big thing for him, and because of the injury history, I think you kind of want to go through the rest of this pre-draft process unscathed. We kind of see it at the combine sometimes. We're all like, he's not going to do this test or that test or that test. To me, like I think that he would really benefit from saying like, yep, I'm fully healthy, guys. I'm doing everything here, and I think that that's something that you kind of have to weigh that because I think one of the other knocks on Tyson is like, oh, like what is the overall athletic upside? So I think you want to put every single ounce of effort into training. Hey, like what's up? You want to maximize that 40 time, maximize the three cone, all that stuff. You want to make sure that you are as good as possible when that final number is written on your draft card in all 32 draft rooms around the league. But at the end of the day, I think you almost have to say like whatever the best number is for the combine. I do think that if he ends up saying like, oh yeah, like I'm not going to do this or I'm not going to do that, I think a lot of people are going to kind of put that down and say like, man, like this guy couldn't finish a season. It's been 3 years where he was he was on the sideline for a substantial amount of time, and now he's not working out at the combine. That will weigh more for teams than for your typical prospect. So I think that could determine like tiebreakers when you're looking at Tyson versus Carnell Tate, and when you're looking at you're comparing them to some of the other top receivers in this class. So I do think that that's going to be big for Jordyn Tyson. Fair or not, I will say this. We talk about like athletic background, and I went to a Sixers Cavs game just recently, a couple weeks ago. Sixers could not stop his brother. he dropped like 40 points on the Sixers that night. You see, like, all right, like how like the athletic lineage in this family is pretty strong. But Tyson's senior year, the big question I had about him was just the drop issues, and that was something I'm like, all right, like if I'm going to have questions about the overall athletic upside, I need you to be awesome as in terms of finishing at the catch point. I can't like can't give up both. And to me, what I saw was a guy that maintained that routes running skill, that ability to create separation on his own, play through contact at a high level. That's something that I really weigh heavily as a wide receiver, is that ability press man, like fight through contact mid route. You're getting bumped, fight through contact, stay on your path, and be able to play through that, and then finish at the catch point through contact. Whether that's defender or to the ground, whatever, what have you. He does all of those at a really high level, and he really cut the drops down this year. And to me, that was what really kind of gave me a firm crystallization that this guy's a round one player, but the health is going to be the big thing that a lot of people are going to knock him on.
1000%. And look, I'm sure you would like to answer this question maybe in a couple weeks or maybe a month or two. But now that I've got you, I feel like I've got to throw you on the spot here. Is there any world in your eyes where we see Jordyn Tyson as the first wide receiver off the board?
I think it's possible, sure, because I do think that a lot of people are kind of viewing he and Carnell Tate, kind of on that same tier right now. And so, if he has a better pre-draft process than Carnell Tate, I do think that he could be ranked ahead of him by some people. And so, I do think that at the end of the day, like it's not within the range. It's not there's a non-zero chance that he's the first. He's the first receiver off the board. So, if he goes to the combine, he does the full gamut of tests, looks good, interviews well, people don't have questions about the medical, then I feel good about his chances there in that kind of situation.
Well, you heard it from Fran Duffy. Arizona State's going to have two sure thing lock first round Sun Devils, right? Max Aanatur, Jordyn Tyson. Fran, we always appreciate the time. Next time we'll chat Keith Abney, more
Yes.
Tyson, Iheanachor, and a lot more of those league wide Arizona State Sun Devils.
Appreciate it, man.